This is how the American empire will collapse. I know many of you watching this video right now will admit the United States is in decline. But what will cause its inevitable fall? To understand this, we've got to go back in time and look at it through the lens of macroeconomics. So you can not only be prepared financially, but more importantly, you can be prepared personally. Most people would go back to the Roman Empire or the British Empire to try to draw some parallels to come to a conclusion as to how the end game will play out for the United States. But I think it's even better to look at the Egyptian Empire. Go all the way back to the end of the Bronze Age, around 1175 BC. At this time, we saw Ramses III in power. He was the last great pharaoh. And we also see him in a constant struggle with his nemesis, a group, believe it or not, called the Sea People. In their boats, they would travel up and down the coast of the Mediterranean and wreak havoc, cause utter devastation to every single city they came across. They were so dominant that many back in the day thought they couldn't even be human. They had to be a product of some sort of sea monster or maybe some alien that came down into space. It was just like a sci-fi movie until they met up with Ramses III and the Egyptian Empire. Now, although the Egyptian Empire was able to hold them off, it didn't prevent their inevitable decline. So the question then becomes why? If Egypt was able to fend off the biggest threat of the day, how did their society still collapse? To understand this better and draw some shocking parallels with the United States today, let's go right to the internet. This map does a great job of telling the story of what actually led to the demise of the Egyptian Empire. So going back to the whiteboard, you remember I talked about the Sea People. Well, this map shows how the Sea People, the Sea Peoples, would go up and down this coastline. They came down from the Adriatic Sea and just started basically cleaning house on all of these cities. They wouldn't just go in and steal everything and take slaves. They would burn the city to the ground. There was nothing else left. So they started here with Dime. I guess the pronunciation is, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of these wrong. And then they go, like I said, right down the coastline here and pretty much wipe out everything in their sight. And then they go straight up to Seraglio, and they keep on going all the way over to Cyprus. Then they went over to Ugarit. I think this was one of the major port towns of the day. And then they go right down through what is today Israel into Egypt. Now, the Pharaoh got a heads up that they were coming. He knew the devastation that they had created, and he wasn't buying the fact that these people were aliens or some sort of monsters from the sea. He said, no, these people are human, and I'm going to push back with all of my force. So he knew that they would most likely come through the Nile River Delta. This is where the Nile River opens up to the sea. But he also knew that his warriors were terrible on the water. Their strength was on dry land. So what he did is he had all of his archers and the guys that were great with the spears and the chariots. He had them hide out in all of the cattails and kind of the plants and the trees alongside this Nile River Delta. And when the Sea People came in, Ramses III, he had all of his troops set up, waiting, kind of like a booby trap for the Sea People. So sure enough, their ships came through the Nile River Delta. And when they got closer and closer to the shore, then all of a sudden, the archers just rain arrows down on them. and the sea people panicked. They tried to go to the shore, and that's when they were met by the spears and the chariots of Ramses III army. So at this point, you can imagine all of the Egyptian people are feeling fantastic. Yes, we beat the biggest threat the world has ever seen. We've got nothing to worry about. Ramses III thought that he would go down in history as the person that saved the Egyptian empire. But within a matter of decades, the Egyptian empire collapsed. So the question is how? And when we answer this question, then we start to see some parallels with what we're seeing, not just in the United States today, but with the 2022 version of the Sea People and how this will or could lead to the inevitable collapse of the American empire, just like it led to the collapse of the Egyptian empire thousands of years ago at the end of the Bronze Age. So here's what happened after the Pharaoh beat the infamous Sea People. We've got it drawn right up here on the board. You can tell how great my artistic skills are. But we've got Egypt right here in the middle, and this little green line is the Nile River, believe it or not. And we know, going back to the map, that the Sea People were coming in to attack. They've got their boat here. We're calling them the Sea Peeps just because I didn't have enough room to write people in there. They are very, very angry. And you can see they're mean. They've got their swords, their pirate hats and whatnot. And they've got this skull and crossbones with a sign on their sail that even says scary. So you know it's legit. So anyway, they came down through the sea, maybe it was the Adriatic, I think, and they pretty much wiped out everything in their path. So they went to all of these cities. The first one gone, second gone, third gone, fourth gone, and just kept making their way around until they pretty much wiped out everything in their path. But at the time, Egypt, although they exported a lot of goods, and this is where we get into the macroeconomic stuff, they also imported a lot of the goods that they needed for their society. Now, is this starting to sound familiar to the United States today? And what happened is all of these arteries, if you will, fed into the Egyptian empire. They kept it afloat. It's just like we've got the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses right here, obviously. And I just used the analogy of the brain of the Egyptian empire being fed by all of the arteries. But what happens if you cut off the arteries? Well, then the brain and Pharaoh himself die. Just like you can see right here where he's laid out with X's over his eyes, just like the heroin guy from the streets of San Francisco. So the exact same thing happened with Egypt as a whole. When you cut off all of the arteries, you cut off the supply of goods to Egypt, even if they are the last man standing, if you will, even though they survive the attack of the Sea People, because all of their trading partners are completely wiped out, Egypt, within decades, collapses as well. To get even more insights on this incredible time in history, let's cut right to a clip from the Fall of Civilizations podcast.
The Egyptians were victorious. They had repelled the invasion, but this alone would not save them. To see why, you just have to look at the situation that surrounded it. Egypt now stood alone in a devastated region, like the hero at the end of a disaster movie. Every land around them had been gutted and reduced to ash. Vast and ancient civilizations, the Mycenaeans, the Hittites, Ugarit, the Kassite dynasty of Babylon, all of these venerable societies had collapsed utterly, and civil order had given way to chaos. Those precarious trade routes we talked about at the start of the episode were now broken, and Egypt's economy went into a steep and unstoppable decline. By the end of the Late Bronze Age, Egypt was utterly diminished, a shadow of its former self.
I think the parallels are startling, to say the least. Instead of Egypt, right in the middle, that needs all of these support lines coming in from the other countries around them that produce all of the stuff, now it's the United States. And although we don't have to worry about actual sea people destroying all of our trading partners, like let's say Japan or Germany or China, now we have to worry about an even more powerful force, the United States dollar. As you guys know from watching my videos, the United States dollar on the DXY has gone from 90 to 100 to 105. Now it's over 110, and it may go even higher. Where does it stop? 120, 130, 150 maybe. And we've seen what it's done to countries like Japan. In fact, many experts there are predicting the yen will go to 170 to the dollar. Now, for those of you who might not connect the dots there, what that means is they've got to make a choice between their currency or protecting the interest rates on the yield curve. We call it yield curve control. So either you blow up the currency and the economy is destroyed in the process, or you allow interest rates at the long end of the curve to go up to their natural level, which would also destroy the economy because the debt is so high. Another problem for Japan is they import most of their energy. Well, how are those transactions settled? In US dollars. So if they don't have enough dollars coming in because of all these economic problems, it just makes matters that much worse. They've got to print even more yen to buy dollars, which takes them into a doom loop of the yen completely collapsing against the dollar along with their entire economy. And we see a similar thing play out in Europe. UK the other day with their gilt market blowing up. What did they have to do? They had to intervene. And one of the big problems was the British pound going down so significantly against the dollar. Because if the British pound is losing purchasing power, then that's going to drive up interest rates at the long end of the curve, which almost bankrupted their entire pension system. Turkey, in the exact same position as Japan from the standpoint, the majority of their energy is imported. Therefore, they need dollars. If they don't have dollars due to global economic recession, then they've got to print the Turkish lira. And you get to a point where they're right on the brink of hyperinflation. We know what's been happening in the emerging markets, like Sri Lanka. This is a result of the dollar going higher and higher and higher, acting as a wrecking ball, destroying everything in its path, just like the sea people did at the end of the Bronze Age. Oh, but wait, there's more. It's not like the dollar has stopped its economic devastation. So far, it's undefeated. What happens when it arrives on the shore of our number one trading partner, the country we are most reliant on, and this is China. So now the argument would be, hey, George, well, maybe the United States is the last man standing, just like Egypt was in 1175 BC. But we were in this exact same position, or a very similar position, at the end of World War II. And things didn't turn out so bad. In fact, we used that to our advantage. Why is it any different today? Well, you've got to remember that back during World War II, we were a manufacturing powerhouse, meaning we exported far more than we imported. This is why, at the end of the war, we had all of the gold, because we produced far more than we consumed. So if all of our trading partners were just basically destroyed, it didn't impact us to a significant degree because we were producing more than we consume. Today, it's the complete opposite. Editor, go ahead and throw up a chart, and you can see the trend of our trade deficit since 1971. And our trade deficit has increased significantly to a point where just a few months back it was over $100 billion for the month, not just the year. So we understand how precarious, how vulnerable, how fragile our economy is today. A lot different than the end of World War II. We are far more dependent, in fact, vitally dependent on our trading partners. Today, we consume far more than we produce. And if we don't have other countries around us that are producing the stuff we need, we aren't going to consume anything. And if that happens, that will inevitably lead to the fall of the American empire. And the irony is our greatest asset, the dollar, being the global reserve currency, could turn out to be our greatest liability and bring down your drunk, insolvent Uncle Sam, just like the Sea People brought down Ramses III. For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments, check out this playlist right here. I will see you on the next video.